Welcome to NatRevMD, a podcast where we share tips on optimizing medical billing and improving practice efficiency so you can have the business of your dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Signorelli, founder of NatRevMD. Let's get started. All right. So if you feel like your practice sometimes is filled with gossip, that your teams are operating in these little resentful silos, or there's a lot of back office conversations going on, then this episode is for you. So we all know that human nature, right? Practice culture can be challenging at times, right? We're all humans. We all have feelings and can get hurt. But deep down, that can cost a practice, regardless of the size, whether you have a team of 2 or a team of 10 or a team of 20, it can cost the practice money in terms of staff turnover, inefficiencies, lost revenue. And so today we're going to break down Patrick Lencioni's powerful framework from the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I actually did this with my team on my hospital side and was really interesting. It was actually probably my most favorite exercise that I've ever done with my team, and really thought that I'd share some kind of nuggets from this. So if you haven't read the book, highly recommend the book. Personally, I liked reading the end of the book and then going back and starting because the end is where they really go over the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So today we're going to talk about those 5 dysfunctions, really, really high level, how it may be plaguing your practice right now. We're going to talk about the absence of trust and why that's just such a fundamental issue that makes everything else work, if you can get through that, right? And then how to encourage that healthy conflict when you have concerns, again, whether this is billing policies or just patient workflows with your personnel. We're going to talk a few practical steps to build that, but highly, highly recommend checking out the book. There's some tabletop exercises that your team can do through several different types of organizations. And again, I've done the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram and all these other different things. And I do think it's nice to know like where your tendencies are or what you believe is your core principles, because that's what you bring into a relationship, right? And the relationships with your coworkers. And so today we're just going to talk a little bit about that. So I will be very honest with you. We all know that gossip and, the hallway conversations or the meetings behind the meetings all happen, right? It happens in all businesses. And I think the key is are you avoiding dealing with those things and dealing with real issues? Or are you trying to work with your team to make sure that everybody's open and honest with each other and having, difficult conversations, but those difficult conversations help move a practice forward? And practice culture isn't something any of us were taught in medical school. It's not something that's even taught in business school, but it is just a really important thing. And it can cost, again, inefficiencies, staff turnover, and just processes that break, but nobody's really willing to stand up and talk about why they're broken and help fix them. So that's why I thought it would be important to talk about this. And there's also some really great YouTube shorts from Patrick Lencioni. So first, the 5 dysfunctions of a team is modeled in a pyramid shape, right? And so if the foundation is cracked, which we'll talk about is trust, everything else above it is going to crumble. And so the goal is to have a team that trusts each other, that you can share ideas openly, that you commit to decisions, hold each other accountable so that you can essentially drive the business forward, right? Get the results you need from a business perspective. And so we're going to talk through those 5 dysfunctions as well as some key things that I recently learned that can help bring out the best in people. Again, it is nice to have some fundamental understanding of what everybody prioritizes or how they operate. Some people may operate with a true sense of responsibility, right? They feel that they're truly responsible. For me, I, love independence. Independence is probably my number one thing, with achievement or desire to get results is my number 2. And so there are some tabletop exercises where you can kind of define where everybody lands, right? Do you lead with a sense of responsibility? Do you lead with a sense of independence? Do you lead with a sense of family? And I think there was, 100 plus different words that people could choose 1 or 2 things from. So then you understand where they're coming from when it comes to operating in a team environment. And so the first dysfunction, so if you think about that pyramid, is the absence of trust. So this is that foundation. And it's not about trusting people to do their job. It's about ability to be vulnerable. So it's ability for you to work in an environment where it's safe to admit that you've made a mistake, that you need help, or that you don't know without fear of judgment. And this is so hard to build, but is the most important thing when it comes to a team situation. And so when you think about your role, either as a leader of a department or leader as a business, you have to go first, right? You have to be the one to admit mistakes. And obviously that can be hard, but it is important for everybody to first and foremost feel that everybody's human, right? We all make mistakes. And how do you respond to those mistakes, right? And how do you respond to somebody else making a mistake in your office? Do you reprimand them? Do you call them out in a public forum? Or do you do something private behind closed doors? How you basically set up that environment of being able to allow people to be, free and willing. I mean, obviously, we don't want mistakes to happen all the time, but we all know that they will happen and can happen. For me, for example, like I can be super hardworking, very, very driven, but I can also disengage if I feel micromanaged or if I feel like I'm not trusted to do my job. And so again, even if that's not happening from a malicious standpoint, I will shut down and become resentful and then create this negative narrative in my head that is not in reality. And so these are little nuances that if that's happening in your office, or they feel like they can't speak up, or they feel like they can't be trusted, that if they make a mistake, they're not going to get in major trouble, then people are afraid to share on their own. They're afraid to have healthy debate. And then you end up with a result of lack of buy-in and then lack of results when it comes to moving a business forward. These other dysfunctions are impossible to overcome. So dysfunction number 2 is called fear of conflict. So obviously when there's no trust in a team, you can't have healthy, passionate debates. And instead, you kind of get this artificially quiet harmony in meetings, but then you get all the toxic conversations in the hallways, right, behind closed doors. And it's funny because as a society, I think we're taught to bite our tongue, right? To be polite, to be kind. And it's thought that you can't be kind and provide feedback at the same time. And I think especially for women, maybe men just as much, but there's this avoidance, right? I'm just going to avoid conflict, but then go complain about it behind the scenes. And so that can be very damaging to a team culture and to a company. And so that's where those stories in a head, right? That negative narrative, but it's not rooted in reality can happen, right? You have these one-off conversations. And you're like, oh yeah, I thought that process wasn't going to be something that we could fix. And that can go on and on and on. And then those people are shutting down in public, but then having all of this negative conversation. And they may be even spinning it up to where it's way more negative than it was ever intended to be, or again, not rooted in reality. And so it's not dealt with. And then that can lead to turnover. People don't want to come to work. They don't feel like they can openly have conversations. And so then you get turnover. So really, really important to, again, focus on that trust. Enable your staff to bring up when they have feedback on something. Obviously, doing this in a polite, respectful manner is very, very key here. But asking for feedback, calling out issues, saying, hey, I know that this may be an issue, but I don't want people to retreat and then go have hallway conversations about an issue. Like, let's just bring it out into the open. And maybe there's a cooling off period if somebody's really upset about a certain issue, but then coming back and going, hey, can we circle back on that? Let's bring up your concerns and let's address them, I think is the biggest way to help people feel like they can share. And again, their points may be valid, may be well taken, and you need to take those into account as you make decisions. So that is just one really good way that leaders can invite feedback, invite conflict, address it. Don't be afraid to try things that maybe staff brought up that are good ideas, right? Because then that shows that they're part of the team, part of the decision-making process. Obviously, that's not always going to be possible, but is a good way to get everybody, again, to have the buy-in to drive the business forward. So as you guys know, friction between your front desk and your billers is a classic symptom and almost always start with eligibility. So if your front desk isn't getting eligibility right, it creates a cascade of denials that your billing team has to clean up, which can sometimes create resentment. So while we're talking about team dysfunction, we do have this eligibility and billing verification checklist that you guys can download. You can head on over to natrevmd.com/eligibility billing verification, and it will give your front desk the exact process that they need to get it right the first time. All right, let's head on over to dysfunction number 3. Okay, so this is lack of commitment. So you see how we're kind of building upon the pyramid, right? We talked about trust, we talked about conflict, now we're talking about commitment. So if people don't weigh in because there's a fear of conflict, they don't buy in. And if your team hasn't been part of the debate, hasn't had their concerns heard, or hasn't had their ideas at least evaluated, then they're not going to be committed to the final decision. So an example of this is your practice, you're getting a new EMR, but there was no healthy conflict on the decision of which EMR and no real buy-in from the providers on this change. So then they passively resist the change. They never really full adopt the system. They don't deal with the templates. They don't like the new workflow. And this can make revenue drop. It can make really the investment of a new system fail. And so really, really important that everybody's bought in and that you've all weighed in on the pros and cons of making this decision, making a new investment in a new system, and everybody's on board to make it the best as possible. So that's just an example that we've seen. We just really got to make sure, again, everybody has that place where they feel trusted to provide their feedback so that when a decision is made, everybody's committed to it. Dysfunction number 4 is avoidance of accountability. And this isn't about leader accountability, right? This isn't about a leader keeping their staff accountable. This is about peer accountability. And so this is about the team dynamics that allow peers to call each other out, not just the leader, again, being that sole enforcer. And so when a team doesn't commit to a plan, they don't hold each other accountable. So an example in a practice could be that a provider, maybe 1 or 2 physicians are consistently not signing out their charts in time, right? It's delaying billing by weeks. The billing manager may be the only person who's bringing this up, or the billing outsource team may be bringing this up. But the other providers, they may see it, but they don't want to create conflict. They don't want to get involved. And so it just goes on and on and on. And, the physicians may feel resentful because of the practice revenue, and maybe that's impacting bonuses for everybody. And so this is where the team needs to agree on a standard, run open discussion around, hey, can we make 72 hours our goal? And we're all going to agree that that's going to be a goal, and here are the reasons why. You can have a healthy debate around the pros and cons of having it set at 72 hours or needing it at 48 or maybe 7 days. And again, have that discussion with everybody openly. Maybe have those who are struggling get help from those peers who have a really solid process. And so when this works, right, and you agree to a standard and you agree to move forward, it's peer accountability to check in with a peer to say, hey, are you struggling with your chart sign out still? Can I help you? Let's make sure that we're all meeting that goal together. We all agreed to that. And then it's not just one leader, one person keeping that, one physician accountable. It's the entire office or team is keeping each other accountable. And so when you have that type of environment, it just propels the entire team forward because everybody agrees that we're all going to keep each other accountable. We've all agreed to this certain standard and we're going to move forward and accomplish that together and keep each other accountable for if somebody falls out of line, or help that person, see what you can do to help make sure that, they're able to do that as well, which obviously is going to drive practice revenue if you can get that done. It's these kind of small culture issues that actually create huge financial leaks. We've certainly seen it, and definitely in a risk for your practice if you don't kind of deal with some of this not so fun things we're not taught how to do culture within a practice. All right, 5. The 5th dysfunction is inattention to results, right? And so this is kind of in that quietly quitting stage, right? So no one's holding each other accountable. People just naturally just are focusing on their own individual needs or goals, but they're not really focusing on the collective results of the team or the practice. And that can result in poor performance, right? So if everybody is holding each other accountable, if everybody's bought into the path forward, then the practice is going to move forward in unison. And so an example is the front desk could be focused on reducing patient wait times. So they rush and check in, but they're missing critical insurance verification. The billing department's focused on their goal of clean claims, but they're constantly fighting errors with the front desk. And so everybody's putting their individual goals ahead of the overall practice revenue. And so that's where, getting these teams together, whether it's outsourced team or in-house team, sit down and go over, okay, what are the goals of the practice and how can we drive forward so that we're all marching in the same direction? Again, goal here is that the practice moves forward faster and is more successful. And again, this can be applied to any team. This could be your front office team. This could be your whole office team, depending on how big the team is. So this is why I think it's really important that when you have shared meetings that you're talking about, okay, what are the company goals? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Is there any feedback or questions or concerns? If there is, let's talk it out. So to summarize a few strategies that you guys can use to address these dysfunctions, again, highly recommend having you or the team read the book. I guess, again, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. So strategy number 1 is first starting with building vulnerability, and that's trust, right? So getting to know each other, outside of just a work environment is, helpful. I think having, a happy hour or lunch or something that allows you guys to talk about things outside of just work process. And then as the leader, you've got to go first, right? You've got to talk about your weaknesses because that gives your team permission to be human, which at the end of the day, I think if we can all start and realize and treat each other with respect and kindness and show that we are all, likely going to make a mistake at some time and share that mistake and go, gosh, I should have done that differently. Here's what I've learned from it. And others may say, yeah, I saw that happening, saw that train wreck going down, getting ready to happen, but I didn't say anything. And so again, once you build that vulnerability-based trust, then you allow for strategy number 2, which is healthy conflict. So during meetings, don't let people be silent. Call them out. Hey, Sarah, what are you thinking about this? You manage the front desk staff, and what problems are you potentially seeing? And then strategy number 3 is then when you have that conflict, it forces clarity and buy-in. So at the end of the day, you have a decision that everybody can support this, right? And if people don't have a commitment towards it, then the goal is going to likely struggle. So really making sure that everybody's committed. Strategy number 4, again, create peer accountability. A daily huddle is a perfect place to review this, right? When you publicly review key metrics like open charts or eligibility denials, you create a structure for the team to hold each other accountable. Again, the purpose is not to be rude or mean or unkind. It's just, direct. And there's another book called Radical Candor that we were discussing earlier today as another really great option just to really make sure, again, you can be empathetic, but you can be direct at the same time. And then the last strategy, number 5, is focus on a single shared goal. Unify the team around that, whether that's reduce eligibility denials by 10%. And so when the entire team is focused on that same scoreboard and that you're reviewing that on a frequent manner, you're holding each other accountable. It's not just the leader holding each other accountable. Then silos start to break down. And instead of those back office conversations, you're having them in an open forum, which is the goal. Fixing culture is not just a soft skill. Like, it is a really important thing that helps your team grow and reduce turnover. And I do think that it directly impacts your bottom line. And a dysfunctional team often leads to dysfunctional practice metrics, whatever those metrics are. So really important. Check out the book. And would love to hear from you guys, topics that you guys want to hear more about. I had a few emails over the last couple of weeks, and we're working to schedule those in. You can shoot us an email at info@natrevmd.com. And as always, if you are looking for a new billing team, head on over to our website, natrevmd.com. And check the right upper corner for free practice analysis and see if you qualify. We'd love to take a look at your metrics and sit down with you. All right, have a great week. Talk soon.